everything's changing in PR these days. So now what? Social media can be extremely draining. We know that. That's the understatement of the year. But if you really need to be visible on it, how can you fight the brain rot and how can you cultivate positive connections with the right audience? Today, we're going to explore how to use social media in a way that actually feels authentic to you and authentic to your brand. Well, as the agency's chronically online Gen Z representative, I'm really excited about today's topic. I could talk about social media all day, and I do spend a lot of time on it, so I'm glad that we're getting to dive into it. Coming from a news background, how do you think that news and the distribution of information has changed with social media?
Yeah, that's a great context setting. And I'd just say up front that, it's 2025. Social media is media. It's not some separate little cave that people play on, although they do that. But it's no different now than the other channels where people get their information and, engage in conversation. Traditional newspapers, magazines, television, all of these things have become much more amorphous, but they're all media. They're just different facets of media. And in fact, I know we were chatting about the other day that study from Reuters last year,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Charting where people get their information. And just, in the last couple of years, it has evened out from traditional news sources and social media sources. They are on an equal playing field for audiences. So, even though it's fun to kind of dismiss it based on platform or what's trending or various other issues, it is legitimate media. And so as PR professionals, we have to pay attention and focus our expertise in those areas.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think there's also a lot of outlets that are doing a really good job at adapting to mobile first content. Like an example that I think of a lot is like KPBS here in San Diego. They produce really, really well made videos that are specifically for social. And I think there's just something to be said about them making that reach to people who are maybe not consuming news or reading news in another way.
It's a famous saying from our fearless leader, Marianne O'Connor, here at Sterling Communications is fish where the fish are.
Mm-hmm.
If your audience, the audience you're trying to reach, is spending most of their time on a particular social media platform, that's where you have to have a presence.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads me into, my primary question for you, because you really are, tactically speaking, our social media goddess. How does an organization, how do you choose the right platform for your organization or gauge where you need to be? I mean, would we ever advise a B2B client to be on every social channel that they can log into?
It's honestly such a tough question because it really depends on the amount of time, the amount of resources that you and your organization are willing to throw at social media. I think that we're in a time where it's not as hard to get like buy-in from senior leadership on social media and get budget for social media. People see the value of social, but I still think you have to pick and choose where you're going to put your efforts. Not every brand can be Duolingo on social media, and not every brand should. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with Duolingo, they're a language learning app that's built a really amazing amount of brand awareness through like funny videos on TikTok and capitalizing on trends. But the amount of effort and the team that goes into producing that level of content to grow us, I think they have like 16 million followers on TikTok now. The amount of effort that goes into keeping up a platform like that is very, very intense.
Right. And I mean, it's probably appropriate for a global brand like Duolingo to be putting that much investment in a global platform like TikTok.
Mm-hmm.
But for, say, a small healthcare venture fund,
Mm-hmm.
should they be spending $2 million on TikTok? Probably not.
Yes. Agreed.
So there's some level setting. And
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the things that we do very well here at Sterling is identifying what percentage of your media focus should be directed specifically to social channels. And then picking and choosing which platforms are most appropriate depending on the audience you need to reach with whatever the particular message is. A good example would be that we represent a local water utility here in the Silicon Valley. We do have mass media campaigns related to issues of water quality, regulation, service delivery, engineering. But also part of our purview for them is to cover customer communications, just to keep their customers informed, make sure that they know how to contact them, keep them apprised of how the utility is behaving in the community. It's a way of staying in contact with a very specific customer base. And we found like for them, channels like Facebook and Instagram are much more effective places for us to focus our social media efforts, because that's where the majority of their customers are scrolling information, scrolling for local news. So,
and LinkedIn for them has been a really great platform for them to be on, because they can make great connections with other professional organizations in the utility space. And there aren't as many of their customers on LinkedIn probably as Facebook or Instagram, but there still are a number of customers who keep up with them in that way. And it just paints them in a good professional demeanor. Like it's a good place to especially show off their community service and involvement in that way too.
Yeah, and you're touching on another issue, which is attracting employees, the kind of people that you want working for your organization. And LinkedIn in particular, that's a very interesting case because, of course, I've been kicking around for a while and I automatically default to thinking of LinkedIn as an employment platform. There's, you put your resume here, you apply for jobs, you see what companies are up to. It has evolved into something much, much bigger than that. And in fact, in these days where you have quite often culture wars playing out on the other platforms, LinkedIn is one of those places that you go to for actual thought leadership. Actual news on, important research or breakthroughs or funding announcements or deals between companies. They're like, I had no idea that they would be working together on this project.
LinkedIn's also kind of made a move in the past year toward mobile first video too, with their video feed in their app. So you can scroll in a similar way that you would on TikTok or on Instagram Reels, but it's a little bit more professionally catered content. It's also a good place for that.
Somebody said this the other day and it cracked me up, where I said, we'll get the intern to post that on the Facebook or whatever. Social media is actually like specialty. Even the small, like even if you just decide to have your communications department at your company have a regular presence on, say, LinkedIn, to do that well is a full-time job. That's the other thing about social media, is that the platforms are constantly evolving with their features and capabilities, but also the audiences are constantly evolving, the preferences. You even mentioned mobile, which is where most people now consume their social media. That was not true when all of these platforms first started taking off. That the customs change so quickly that it requires a great deal of attention and constant use to have proficiency. And when we say it's a drain, I'm not just talking about the content that sometimes is on different social media channels. It's draining just to keep up with all that technology. It seems to me that social media requires a lot more thought and strategy than we generally assign it. But there's an opportunity for PR agencies to be extremely helpful for this arena in particular, because it's a big time sink, especially if you want to do it, quote unquote, right, that you're trying to be authentic and the kind of connection that you're trying to make with an audience. What is the most important thing with any social media effort?
I would say the most important thing with any social media effort is to be consistent. Have a consistent posting schedule that you're following. Algorithms for all platforms change all the time. It's every week there's a different recommendation for how many times you should post and what time of day is best. And it's hard to cater to each one of those algorithms, but you will be most successful if you're making sure you're showing up consistently. So, like, for example, for one of our clients, we're posting every weekday. We have something going up across most platforms. And you also want to post often on social media, but not too often. Don't overwhelm your audience, and make sure that you're not spamming them. Usually once a day is plenty for most platforms. And I think another thing that's really important with social media and providing value with social media is to give your audience something that they're not going to see by looking at your website. You want to give them a behind the scenes peek at your work, something that feels a little bit more personal so that they can feel that sense of connection with you and also feel like they may want to respond or leave comments, so that you're getting that genuine back and forth conversation, that feedback through social media. We field a lot of questions for our water utility client through social media, and they have a lot of customers who feel maybe more comfortable, or it feels more natural for them to reach out via a DM rather than an email to customer service. Maybe it feels a little bit more personal to them. So if you can help meet customers where they're at, you're going to have a lot more happy customers.
Yeah. Yeah. There is a kind of an inherent informality
Mm-hmm.
that people will mistake for a lack of importance. And, really, when you're trying to make a connection with anyone, that's actually a lubricant for real conversation, real exchange, real sentiment. I mean, you're talking about customers, but it can also extend to potential partners or, people who are interested in your technology, depending on the platform. But I think that's one of the kind of a key insight that you just touched on, and you seem to do so naturally, is that to not mistake that level of casual friendliness with something that doesn't have weight, doesn't have merit. Because there are so many platforms, and because they each kind of have their different they're different ecosystems, but they're also different customs around what's appropriate or what people like to see on them. I mean, you made the differentiation between the kind of content you'd post on Instagram is going to be more visual, quick, happy. Hey, here's a number. We'll be at this area. Come out and say hi. Maybe versus on a website. Yeah, exactly. Which will have, here are the real details, and click here for our FAQ, and click here for billing, or click here for investor profiles, whatever it is, much more detailed, text heavy information. But on the flip side of that, I'm thinking like from an agency perspective, one of the things that we're always very cognizant of is, KPIs and how you measure impact and how you measure value. And that is a really sticky wicket as far as I'm concerned with social media, because they are these closed platforms. How do we try to deliver those kinds of measurements and, just impact intelligence to our clients?
Yeah, we look at not only the numbers of impressions, interactions, comments, that kind of thing, but also the comments, the information, the feedback that we're getting from customers, from followers, and take that into consideration as well when we're planning content calendars. If one person is asking a question, probably other people have that same question, so we'll turn that into an opportunity to deliver content that is speaking to like what people want to see.
Actually, that's a really good point. I think a lot of people don't, data scientists probably do, but a lot of people in communications don't necessarily utilize social media as an intelligence gathering platform as well, based exactly on that. Who is actually responding to our message.
When you have a PR agency helping you elevate your social content, you have somebody who's there to say, hey, I think that this thing that you're doing is really interesting, and people would eat that up on social media. They would be so excited to see it. You have somebody who's able to pick out the community events that you're involved in or the awards that you've won and say, people really need to know about this. Here's how you're going to be able to authentically share that in your own brand voice on social media.
Sophia, off the top of your head, what are your, Sophia's 3 tips for social media?
My top tips for social media are to be candid, be real, be authentic. Don't worry about showing up too polished. Be consistent. have a consistent posting schedule, make sure you're showing up on social media regularly, and be helpful. Try to help people learn something, share your knowledge, and be that authoritative voice in your space.